All right, folks, let's get started. We've got one more speaker to go here. Okay, great. So Scott Douglas is going to tell us a story. His uncle was with the 461st, I believe. Yes. Okay. And Scott and I met at last year's reunion in Dallas, and it was suggested, I think, to him that he might have a story that might be of interest for this year's reunion. So he told me a little bit about it, and it sounded interesting, and we agreed to get in touch later. So 6 or 9 months went by, and he sent me the story, and I was like, wow, this is a great story. People are going to love to hear it. And it's a story about World War II and the internet equals remarkable connections. So please welcome Scott Douglas.
More comfortable. Hello, everyone. Truth be told, Helmar Johansson, who I think some of you know, closer to my mouth, Helmar Johansson, who some of you know, was unable to come, so I'm pinch hitting for him. So I wasn't the plan A, but I am the plan B, which I'm okay with. First of all, I'm humbled to be even up here. The fact that I'm after all these other people, you know, Carl was worried about following Aki. I'm worried about following all of them, but I'm definitely humbled and envious because some of them have darker hair than I do. So, and I'm a couple years younger. Anyway, the reason we're here, New Orleans, 2017. More accurately, Kenner. Is that where we are? Kenner. Yep. Kenner, Louisiana, 2017. Is because of world events that happened 70 to 80 years ago, right? And most importantly, we are here because of the vets that are at this reunion and what they did to risk their lives for the rest of us back in World War II. For just a moment, I'd like you all to think back, not 70 years, not 50 years, not even 30 years, but I'm gonna make you work a little bit. Think back 20 years, okay? What does that make it? 1997 by my public school math. And 1997, just as a reminder, what was going on back then? Well, first of all, Bill Clinton was in the beginning of his second term in office. There was this new thing called the World Wide Web, WWW, the internet, that was becoming commonplace in American households. It wasn't everywhere, but it was becoming more and more commonplace. There were magazines that were published every week, many of which are not published today, in large part because of the internet. And I want to know if all of you can remember Newsweek magazine. Anyone can remember Newsweek? Yes. This magazine arrived at my house June of 1997. Now, in that particular year, I was a 38-year-old father of 2 small girls, living in Seattle with my wife, Mary, who's here at the controls right now. And this magazine showed up. The story that I found in here that was of profound interest to me had nothing to do with Paula Jones, who was on the cover, and the household name back in the 1990s. The profound story that interested me was back a few pages back, in fact, towards the back of the book. It was a story that was about a B-24 veteran, a pilot, actually from Seattle, which caught my attention, and he was using the internet to locate old war buddies and crew members that he served with back in World War II, and he just lost contact with them over the years. And so I saw that story, and I went to my home office. At that time, we had a small home office in the basement. So I ran down there and looked at the same internet site, found it, put in some information, and then for the next 20 years, I've been on my own B-24 research mission. And today I'm going to tell you about what's been happening in the last 20 years, and it won't take that long to tell the story, so I promise you at least that much. Before I share some details with you, I need to give you the backstory and why that story was of interest to me. And I'm going to show you a family photo here. This is the Carlson family. This family was from Portland, Oregon. And you had the 2 daughters, the youngest kids of the family up on top there. You had Margaret and Doris. And you had the parents in the lower left. You had Henry and Ingeborg. And then you had the eldest child, their only son, Arthur, that was there. And that's a collection of names you don't see at elementary schools very often these days. Although I hear Henry's making a comeback. So anyway, Henry and Inga immigrated from Sweden after the turn of the last century and then started their family in the 1920s. After Arthur's first year of college at university, the war had started and he finally decided to enlist in the Army Air Corps. Now, this particular family is of pretty much a lot of importance to me because they're close relatives. My mom is Margaret over there. My Aunt Doris on top, the middle child. The oldest kid, Arthur, and then my grandparents. So Arthur signed up for the Army Air Corps, and he got hooked up with these guys over here. The plane was called Arsenic and Lace, and by mid-December, over in Toretta Field, they had completed 10 missions. And on December 15th, Arthur wrote a letter home to his parents and his sisters, and it went like this. He had a few basic intros, but then he wrote this. He said, "I got Doris's swell card and letter, and I want to compliment Doris on her handwriting. When we start out our mission in the early morning, we listen to Reveille band up in the air on the radio while we're still flying over friendly territory. It makes a nice start for the mission. The nice ending is if there's warm water for a shower waiting for us when we get back." And then he concludes with this. He says, "There's one good thing about the Air Corps. When your number is up, it's a blessing that usually happens fast." I guess that's a blessing. So anyway, he finishes that letter, he signs it and mails it off. And then 2 days later, Arsenic and Lace and a bunch of other planes left for a mission on December 17th. And this particular day, they were not so lucky. They were shot down over Czechoslovakia. 5 of the crew members were killed, and 5 were caught by the Germans and put into German prison camps until the end of the war. Art, unfortunately, was not one of those who survived. So you can see right here the names of all the guys. There were 5 who survived. The guys who did not survive have the red box around their names right there. Fast forward 15 years. So that was 1944. I'm moving this up and I'll get back to the original story. 15 years ahead of time, or beyond, you have the family that's still reeling for the loss of their oldest son. And but life goes on, right? So Doris had married. By 1959, she had 5 kids. Margaret had married. By that time, she had 1 kid, me. And my parents were going through a divorce. And so we moved into the home of Henry and Inga. And by that point, I was kind of a replacement child of sorts. I moved into the same house as Arthur grew up in. I lived in the same bedroom. My middle name is Arthur. I went to the same elementary school, the same high school, the same college. In a lot of ways, Arthur was more a mysterious big brother to me than he was an uncle. Okay, fast forward another 35 years. Now we're back to the story, okay? Back to the mid-90s. And over those 50 years since the war, my Aunt Doris did a fabulous job of keeping track of all the family information about Arthur and all those sorts of different things. But by the mid-90s, she was in her mid-70s, and I got this story here that I was all interested in. So I went down to my home office and put in the information into that magical internet site and waited for my own magic to happen with someone contacting me, just like that guy. Well, back then, the internet was not very sophisticated. So it was basically a big electronic piece of paper. You sign something, and then a couple days later, you have 100 other people have put in information, and the only way that anyone could find any of the information is if they scrolled through, right? So got some information back a few weeks into it. It was someone sent me the serial number of the plane. A few weeks after that, someone sent me information about the same mission that Art was killed on. And it was their relative had crashed on the island of V, I think you pronounce it, on the way back. Yeah, that's it. And so I got a few tidbits of information along the way, but gosh, it was just nothing that exciting. I sort of lost hope that I'd get anything of value, right? Well, December, a lot of things happened in December in the story for some reason. December 12th, 1997, I received this email right here. And it starts out like this. It says, "Hello, I'm Thomas Brinda. I'm a student from Czech Republic. My hobby is World War II and air battles between US AAF and Luftwaffe over my country specially. To your subject, I found an article, The Crash of Bomber Liberator at Olomouc-Nerden, December 17, 1944. In light of the new documents, I will translate for you." And he goes on and translates the article. And then he concludes, "One of the shot down bomber was B-24J, nicknamed Arsenic and Lace. 5 airmen of 10 crew contrived to save their lives, and the others perished." I thought, this is awesome. I put in some information in Seattle, Washington. Another guy on the other side of the country, the other side of the world, finds out about one plane out of 18,000 B-24s that were manufactured. And he knows about my uncle's plane that crashed in the same zip code that he grew up in, basically. And so Thomas and I corresponded for 8 months, back and forth. He sent me all sorts of articles. He mailed me stuff. I mailed him stuff as a thank you, some World War II books and stuff. But we kept in touch. I even went back and visited him a few years ago in the Czech Republic. And for this story today, I call Thomas my internet connection #1, but I also call him a good friend. And he's here today. Thomas, would you just stand up? I'm not going to put him on the spot. He's great with English, but I'm not going to put him on the spot. But Jonathan, there's got to be a prize for coming the furthest, right?
How many miles?
I have bedroom with 2 bedrooms.
No, how many miles there?
Yeah, I think how many mates I may invite in my bedroom. So.
No. He's saying, how many miles did you come in? It took him 31 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy you a free drink at the hospitality room later. So. Okay, moving on with the story. Internet connection #2. Thomas was a big player in this one. When I first started out in this thing, my hope was I'd go to the internet and maybe I'd get in touch with some of these guys, just maybe, you know. But I checked, and before the internet, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to talk to the pilot, right? But it occurred to me that to find someone by the name of Smith in the United States before the internet might be a bit of a challenge, and I never got motivated to find one lonely person named Smith. But as Thomas and I corresponded, he pointed me in the right direction. I believe the 461st was just at the beginning of starting their own website. And Jerry Smith had put some information in there. And for anyone who was internet savvy, had their own email, in their 70s, in the 1990s, that was a pretty big deal. Well, he contributed some information. Thomas found it, and he said, hey, you might want to go check him out. He's over here. I said, awesome. So I ran down to my home computer in the basement, and I put in some information. I also knew that not every vet was always interested in talking about their wartime experiences. So I was very cautious about how I approached it, and let's face it, I was like 2 or 3 steps removed from the one guy he knew, over 50 years ago. So it took a while for us to get together and correspond, in part because Jerry's wife had passed away, so he was working through all that. But in 1999, Jerry made a trip back to the Czech Republic with his youngest daughter, who was in her early 20s at the time, so do the math on that one. Very much younger daughter with his last wife, and they went over to the Czech Republic with the intention of touring back around where he had landed, and he wanted to find out 3 important burning questions of what happened. He wanted to find out what happened to the dead crew members that went down with the plane. He wanted to know what happened to the 12 500-pound bombs that he had to release. As the plane is on fire, he's having to pull it out of formation. He releases them. What happened there? And then he wanted to know, where did the remains or the remnants of the rest of the plane land? So Jerry got all those answers surprisingly, met some amazing people, and he put together a 13-page summary called 55 Years to Closure. It used to be on the 461st website. I don't know if it is anymore, a reference to it, but it's a fantastic summary that really takes care of documenting a lot of the stuff that I was interested in. So Jerry and I got to know each other quite well. He also sent me another document. I find this fascinating. If you can go to this one. It's a little bit of a tough read here, but he was located in Stalag Luft 1, as well as the other 4 survivors. So all 5 survivors ultimately ended up in the same prison camp. They were comparing notes about what happened and everything. And then one night, when apparently the Russians were going to liberate the camp from the east, Jerry talks about how he heard engines and cars, and everyone was heading in vehicles to the west. Not surprisingly, the Germans were smart enough to know if they hung around and had a greeting party for the Russians when they showed up in the next day or so, they wouldn't be treated so kindly, so they headed west with the hopes of being treated better by the Allied troops. Anyway, Jerry gets up the next morning and there's no Germans to be had. Well, Jerry ran into the offices, if you want to call them that, where they kept all of his registration, incoming, thank you for joining us, documents, and found his own. And this particular prison camp had between 9,000 and 10,000 guys. So I don't know how Germans are organized, so it was just probably alphabetical. Yes. But he found it had all information about where he's from. He has his thumbprint down here. Has his photos from when they brought him into the camp. And Jerry told me a story about when he went into the prison camp, he had a really pissed look on his face. He was cranky, it was a bad day. And the guy taking his photo said, "Hey, lighten up a little bit, just don't look so mean." And he said, "I wasn't going to give that guy any satisfaction. I was angry, and I was going to look angry in my photo." So every time I look at that, I think about Jerry and just defiantly not giving in to that photographer guy. But Jerry and I talked once on the phone, a couple times actually. He called me. He said, "Scott," for the first time, he said, "You might want to sit down. This is Jerry Smith." We sat and talked. I sat and talked from Seattle. He was down in California. We talked for 2 hours. The next night, I said, "Hey, can I call you the next night? And I just want to list all the questions that I have. Call me the next night." And the one thing in my mind that I hear and I imagine or remember every time that I talk to Jerry, he was very religious about his after-dinner cocktail. So I would usually talk to him after dinner, and I could always remember hearing ice clinking around in the glass as we were discussing the things of World War II and yesteryear. So I had a chance to meet Jerry. Unfortunately, he was very ill. He was literally on his deathbed. I went down to Disneyland with our family. His daughter Claire picked me up at the airport, and we went to his condominium, and he summoned the energy to talk for almost 3 hours. And so it was a fabulous time. His daughter Claire, she recorded everything, and 2 weeks later he did pass away. But just having that chance to meet Jerry for 5 years, have that correspondence was a real highlight for me. Internet connection number 3 was tailgater John Madrofsky. So John is second guy from the upper right there, and here's another picture of John. I never got a chance to meet John in person, but after meeting Jerry, I got his address in Florida, and he and I corresponded with really long letters. He was very forthcoming, and did a great job of answering everything that I wanted to know about. And I was honored to meet him. He also sent me this article here. It's a little bit tough to see. So this is John Madrowski, age 78. So a vandal in his neighborhood had tried to stuff an American flag down the drain. And I think most vets, as most Americans, but definitely most vets, would not sit still for something like that. So he retrieved it out of the drain and had it decommissioned properly, and somehow that became a news story. But once a vet, always a vet, I guess. And even though he and I only met through the written word, I feel, again, honored to have made contact with him. Internet connection number 4. This has a bit of a story behind it, and it's probably the most meaningful internet connection that we made with my extended family. And first of all, I need to describe a little bit about what happened, and then you'll maybe understand the full story. When Arsenic and Lace was going down, they'd been hit from the rear, plane's on fire. Jerry is pulling plane out of formation. He's trying to release the bombs and ordering bailout. Communications are shot out. There's a whole bunch of things going badly. The oxygen had been shot out. The portables were running low. Arthur was getting ready to jump out, and Goldie, Morris Goldman, on the upper right, was struggling, top turret gunner. He was struggling to get his parachute on, so Art stopped to help him. And ultimately, for lack of oxygen, they both collapsed on the flight deck. And the plane's spinning, it's going down. Jerry Smith, pilot, has his hands full in getting Vero Francisco, co-pilot, out of the plane. He has to step over the bodies, and the plane explodes. And they, in effect, die together, arm in arm. And so, over the years, my family, the Carlson family, was interested in maybe finding the Goldman, but didn't make big efforts for no particular reason that I know of. But the amazing thing was, in 2010, because of the information that was out there, I received a correspondence from Maury Goldman's nephew. His name is Michael Wasserman. So in 2010, I get this phone call through channels that related back to Claire, the daughter of Jerry Smith, the pilot. And ever since then, Michael has been a fast friend. We communicate every year. We go to these things. This is my 4th or 5th, and he's been to 6 or 7. And we went to the Czech Republic together, and he's a good, good friend. And this is Michael. I'm going to have him come up and just say a couple words. So.
Hi, I've had the pleasure of meeting some of you and look forward every year to coming to this. And I would tell you that I sort of knew the story of my Uncle Maury, as he's known in my family. My mother, he was my mother's baby brother. He was the last of 10 children that my grandmother had. And I still remember as a child when she got a letter that said that her baby brother, was missing in action. I didn't know him, but she sure cried hard, and I do remember that. When the war ended, I remember going to visit someone who was in the crew who survived. It might have been Jerry or maybe one of the others who lived nearby, and my mother wanted to find out what happened, and I don't know if she ever really did, but time went by, and those memories, you sort of keep them. But I started, once the internet came around, I began to look up Morris Goldman and Czechoslovakia Morris Goldman, but I never did it right. It wasn't until my younger son, who has a lot more innate skills with the computer than I do, showed me how to find somebody on the internet. And he came across an article, a blog written by Claire Smith, Claire Bidwell Smith. And in this particular article, she wrote about a book she was writing, and one of the chapters was all about her dad, Jerry Smith, and what happened with the crew. Well, I was flipped on this, so I thought, how can I find her? Well, it was easy at the end of the blog. She had her email address, so I was working, I'll never forget this, it gives me chills just thinking about it. I was working at the VA hospital, Hines Veterans Hospital, as a doctor, and I took some time away to send an email to her that I think my uncle was on your father's plane. And within 2 minutes, I got an email back, what was his name? And I said, Morris Goldman, and she said, yes, he was. And so it turned out that she was on the staff of the same hospital that I am. So talk about Smiths. Anyhow, so we made plans to get together, my son and I and Claire got together for dinner, and then she invited us to her house and showed us her dad's uniform, and it was really something special. And she gave me some information about a guy named Milt Klarsfeld, who was the navigator of Arsenic and Lace. She said he lived in Albany, her dad had visited him, and so I went on a search of that, and spent a few nights looking for it, and found a few people who might be the same guy. And I called, man answers the phone, it's hello, I said, hi, my name is Michael Wasserman, and I'm the nephew of Morris Goldman. Because he was on my plane. And we got to talking, we had another 1 or 2 hour conversation. Subsequently learned that he was having his 90th birthday party. I called Scott, he had already told you how we got together. And I said, we got to try to go to this birthday party. So Scott and I and my son Danny went to New York, to Albany for the 90th birthday party of Milt Klarsfeld. That was amazing. The last thing that happened, and I think you wanted me to mention this as well.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
You mean,
yes.
Hold that thought.
Okay. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Scott.
We'll bring it back up in a minute to close it out. Just to sort of connect pictures, there's Milt Klarsfeld in the lower right over there, and here's him. And we're gonna get close to wrapping it up here. I'm gonna have to jump ahead. This should probably have been a two-parter. Mary, can you fast forward to the video? Don't. Okay. So short story. We went to the Czech Republic. Can you put it on 12 for a minute? There was another student from the Czech Republic who, in 2011, tracked us down and said, "Hey, there's a memorial being built for your family in the Czech Republic." So we went and had a great time and saw it. That's like the 2-second version, much longer than that. But the most amazing thing is the same Jurka Cernisek, a student there, much like Tomas was 20 years ago, found a film clip. And this is the most profound film clip I've ever seen, for me anyway. Much of the questions that my family had, and I think other families had, was what happened to the sons in between the end of the war when their plane had crashed and where they finally ended up. So Jurka found a video film footage of a huge ceremony that the Czech people had to remember these crewmen who crashed, and when they exhumed their bodies and relocated them. And this is like 40 seconds of a much longer clip, but just so you get a taste of what they found that was in film footage, which just blows me away even today. Planes overhead. These are the caskets of these 5 guys over here. They're transporting them from Czech Republic. 4 of the guys came back to the country. Art stayed in France with other guys over there. I had the chance to show this to my mom and my aunt before they passed, and I'm not sure they really got it. They're old, and they couldn't piece together that art is in one of those boxes. But at least they get a chance to see it before they passed. And I'm going to close with just a couple quick comments because Jonathan's pulling the cane, figuratively speaking. Through this connection, we made a connection of 7 of the 10 crew members. In baseball terms, if you batted 700, you'd be in the Hall of Fame of the Hall of Fame. We're hoping that someday we can get in touch with the families of Francisco, Stewart, and the Howard families. We made connections just in June with Abramson family, with the other family members, and I've learned a lot of things. Not every family member is into this stuff as much as some of us are, and that's okay. But what is truly undeniable is how amazingly great the greatest generation was in overcoming the Great Depression and the German Nazis. How remarkable the internet has become in the last 20 years to make this world a much smaller place. And World War II and the internet has made some remarkable connections. Thank you.